Good evening, everybody. I hope you are all well and keeping well. Just going to mute all participants again because I can hear an echo. All right. Good evening, everybody. Yep, that's better. So tonight I would like to look at a section in Parshat Matot, also in Parshat Maseh, where you might look at these sections and think this is a historical account of a war which took place a long, long time ago. What might there be there of direct relevance for us today? And what I would like to do is to take some very relevant lessons from this war. Number one, in terms of messages for us to apply in our own lives. But in addition, we're going to see a very practical halachic discussion which occurs today, which comes out of the war with Midian, which I was going to say we're going to read this week in Shul, but which we're not going to read this week in Shul, but appears in this week's Parsha, which we will be reading at home. And the war I'm talking about is the war with Midian. And part of what I'm going to share with you this evening, I shared in a drasha in Beit Yehuda in 2018. And if you remember it, shkoyach, that's fantastic. But I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction and have a different focus from the one I had then. So let's start with a section from the Parsha in source number 1. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe le'emor, Hashem said to Moshe as follows, Nekom nikmat b'nei Yisrael me'et hamidyanim, avenge the vengeance of the Israelites from the Midianites, achar te'asef el amecha, and then you're going to pass away. So Hashem tells Moshe that this is going to be a final battle, a final act of leadership. And following the war with Midian, Moshe is going to pass away. Now, if any of us were told that we've got one more thing to do and then we're going to pass away, we might consider dragging our feet and walking slowly towards that activity. But Moshe performs the will of Hashem straight away. Vaydaber Moshe el ha'am le'emor, Moshe said to the people as follows, Hey chaltzu me'itchem anashim letzava, arm people from amongst yourselves from the army. V'yu al Midian, and they should be against Midian. Latet, to place nikmat Hashem b'Midian, Hashem's vengeance against Midian. And Moshe did a little change here. Hashem asked Moshe to take nikmat b'nei Yisrael, the Israelites' vengeance. And Moshe tells us to take nikmat Hashem, Hashem's vengeance, which is like a loving relationship between two people, each only concerned about the respect and the comfort of the other. We go out to battle for Hashem's respect, but he wanted us to go out to battle for our own respect. Who was going to be in this army? Elef lamateh lechol matot Yisrael, 1,000 person from each tribe. Of all the tribes of Israel, tishlechu latzavah, you should send to the army. And so it was. They sent, or they passed on from the thousands of Israel, 1,000 people per tribe, 12,000 armed soldiers all together. Moshe sent them 1,000 per tribe to war, to the army. Pinchas from last week's Parsha makes an appearance. He goes to war as well, Letzava. Uchlei HaKodesh, together with holy vessels, v'chatzotzrot hatruah biyado, and in his hand was the trumpet in order to blow a truah. Vayitzba'u al Midian, and we waged war against Midian, ka'asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe, like Hashem commanded Moshe, vayahagu kol zachar, and we killed every male. In this miraculous battle, not a single life was lost on our side. We took the life of every single male on the other side. We didn't take other lives. That somewhat disappointed Moshe. We're not going to go into that today, but we were incredibly successful in this battle. Now, if we were to make a movie of this battle and we had to depict exactly what took place, what would it look like? There are two views in the Midrash. This is a short Midrash, but we're going to keep coming back to this Midrash this evening. There are two views in the Midrash of what the actual strategy of war looked like. In source number 2 in the Sifrei Vayitzba'u al Midian, we waged war against Midian. Opinion number 1 is Hekifuha me'arba'a ruchoteha. It means we surrounded Midian from all four sides. We attacked them from all sides. There was no way to escape. And then we were victorious. We killed all the males. Then there is a second opinion in the Midrash. Rabbi Natan Omer, Rabbi Natan says, Natan lahem ruach revi'it, kadei sheyivruchu. No, we didn't surround them from all four sides. We only surrounded them from three sides, but we left the fourth side open in order for them to run away. So there are two views in the Midrash. Did we completely surround them when we went to war against them? Or did we offer them one way out, a way of escape when we went to battle with them? So this is a disagreement in the Midrash. And the disagreement continues into the Rishonim. And it's a disagreement between Rambam Maimonides and Ramban Nachmanides. Now, there are numerous ways of understanding Rambam and Ramban, each of them in this case. We're going to try and keep it simple today, halachically, to focus more on the themes and the halachic intricacies of their opinions. But Ramban Nachmanides, commenting on Rambam Maimonides' lists of mitzvot, makes a list of the occasions where he disagrees with Maimonides, of where he believes the list of 613 mitzvot should look different. That means there are certain things on the list which Maimonides included that Nachmanides thought shouldn't be there. And there are certain things that Maimonides left out that Nachmanides thought should be there. So on the list of positive mitzvot that Rambam Maimonides did not include as the 613 mitzvot, but Nachmanides said you should include, we have in source number 3, Levad re'ezeh matzati mitzvot, shachach otan harav mitzvat aseh. He says are certain mitzvot that Rambam forgot to include in his list of positive mitzvot. I don't think he forgot. I don't think he meant oversight. It meant that he decided not to include them. And on the 5th list of mitzvot that Ramban Nachmanides says is a biblical mitzvah, he says, mitzvah chamishit shenitztavinu, the 5th mitzvah is that we were commanded, kishenatzor al ir, when we siege a city, lahaniach achat min haruchot bli matzor. It is a biblical commandment not to completely surround an enemy in war. She'im yirtzu livrach yelehem derech lanus misham. That if they do want to flee, they've got a way to escape. Ki bazeh nilmod, and the reason why this is the way the Jewish army must wage war is, from here we will learn, lihitnaheg bechemla, to behave with compassion. Afilu im oivenu, even with our enemies, ba'et milchama, at a time of war. According to Ramban, this is a humanitarian law in the Torah. You're not allowed to completely surround your enemy when you go to war. Uba od tikun, and Ramban says not only is it humanitarian, but it's also strategically in your interest. Sheniftach lahem petach sheyivruchu. It's a good idea to give them an escape route. Therefore, they won't come against us too strongly. And we're going to focus on that a bit more later on. Shne'emar, where does this biblical commandment come from? Because it says in this week's Parsha of Matot, Vayitzbu'al Midyan kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe, we waged war like Hashem commanded Moshe. V'rashu b'sifrei, and we saw in the Sifrei. Now pay attention to how Ramban quotes the Midrash. The first opinion of the Midrash is, Hekifuha mishalosh ruchateha, they surrounded it from 3 sides. And the second opinion of the Midrash is, Rabbi Natan Omer, ten lahem ruach revi'it sheyivruchu, give them a 4th direction for them to run away. Now, the way Ramban quotes our Midrash is different from our Midrash. If we look at the top of our screens in source number 2, our first opinion in the Midrash was that that you surrounded it from all 4 sides. And the second opinion was only 3. According to Ramban's version of the Midrash, the first opinion was 3 sides, and the second opinion is give them an escape route. Now, if the first opinion is 3 sides, and the second opinion is 3 sides, what does the second opinion add? So maybe the second opinion is adding the reasoning why you need to leave a side open. Maybe we'll come back to that later on. So, we have a debate in the Midrash. When we waged war against Midian in this week's Parsha, did we leave a side open? Two different views. And that debate appears to continue into the Rishonim with the halachic implication, do we need to behave that way as well? Because Ramban back in source 3 says, Ve'ein za mitzvat sha'aba Midian. That was not a one-off mitzvah for Midian. Aval hi mitzvah ledorot. It is a mitzvah for all future generations, which means this is a biblical command for the IDF today. B'chol milchemet harashut, Ramban says, for every permissible war. There are different layers of war. There's the war against Amalek, the war against the 7 nations. There's a war which is called the milchemet mitzvah, a war which you have to wage. And then there's the milchemet rashut, a permissible war. And Ramban says that if it's a milchemet rashut, a permissible war, the law is you have to leave one direction open for your enemies. And Rambam Maimonides included it in his Mishneh Torah and his Yad HaChazakah. He just didn't include it in his 613 mitzvot. Now, why were they arguing? It seems to be a straightforward argument. But the Meshech Chochmah in source number 4 throws in a brilliant explanation of what is going on here. And he says as follows, and you don't have to agree with the Meshech Chochmah, but he says as follows in source number 4. V'tam plugtatam. What's this whole argument between Ramban and Rambam? Is it a mitzvah to leave a gap? Is it not a mitzvah to leave a gap? They both agree that you have to. The question is it a mitzvah in the Torah? He says as follows. The Haramban sover, Nachmanides holds. The kamod haya mitzvah levakesh l'shalom, just like it's a mitzvah that you have to offer your enemy the chance of peace before waging war with them. Ken hi mitzvah lachus al nafsham. So similarly, it's a mitzvah to show pity, mercy on their lives. Ulaniach lehem ezet tzad la'atzil nafsham, and to give them a way to protect and save themselves. Ulaniach tzad echad panui liot lehem makom livrach, and to leave them an escape route. According to Ramban, this is entirely humanitarian. However, the Meshech Chochmah says that according to Rambam, you need to leave a space open. But the reason why you need to leave a space open isn't to be nice to them. It's to be stronger against them. And he says, Aval Rambam sover, Rambam holds, du ofen me'ofanei ha'milchama. This is one of the ways of waging war. And this is counterintuitive. And he says as follows, if you surround your enemies from all 4 sides, that doesn't make you stronger against them. Why? From the fact that they're completely despaired and desperate to save their lives, that they will fall in the hand of their adversary. They are going to defend their lives with every single last bit of strength that they can, and they're going to wage war in the very best way that you can. If you surround your enemy from all 4 sides, they're going to give their best shot because they have absolutely nothing to lose. And he says, as is known in the history books, there have been numerous occasions. Out of the great despair, great victory has arisen, not despite the despair, but because of the despair. Great despair has driven great victory. Lochein, says the Meshech Chochmah in explaining Rambam, Im hayalhem ofel lahatzilet nafsham. But if you give them an escape route, they're not going to fight as hard. As lo yashlichu et nafshotam merachok. They're not going to go to the nth degree in order to save themselves. V'yivrachu. They might just run away. V'im kain, therefore, ein za shayach lemitzvah. He says, if we're not talking about a humanitarian law, in fact, it's not about being nice to your enemy, it's about beating your enemy and ensuring victory over your enemy. If this is completely strategic, then you cannot command the Israeli army today to always behave in this manner, because strategy changes from battlefield to battlefield and from war to war. And maybe the strategy in certain cases will be to surround them from all four sides. And maybe the strategy in certain cases will be to give them one escape route, two escape routes. Rambam believes you cannot legislate strategy. So while the Torah advises that this is a way to behave, it doesn't mandate that you have to behave this way. And the Meshech Chochmah himself agrees with Rambam. So both Rambam and Nachmanides agree that you have to leave a side open. However, according to Ramban, it's to be nice to your enemy, to be compassionate to your enemy. According to Rambam, it's to be victorious over your enemy. And when we did this Meshech Chochmah for our Monday morning ladies shiur a couple of years ago, I was in the kitchen and I told Althea how much I love this Meshech Chochmah. And she says there's an entire chapter about this in Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational. And he says he talks about it in his book there. So let me share with you the beginning of chapter 9 in this book by Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist, in his chapter called Keeping Doors Open. And he tells the following story. You know, the Meshech Chochmah says, it's known in the history books that this is what's happened in different wars around the world. So let's learn about a certain war from Dan Ariely. And he says as follows. In 210 BC, a Chinese commander named Zhang Yu led his troops across the Yangtze River to attack the army of the Qin dynasty. Pausing on the banks of the river for the night, his troops awakened in the morning to find, to their horror, that their ships were burning. They hurried to their feet to fight off their attackers, but soon discovered that it was Zhang Yu himself who had set their ships on fire, and that he had also ordered all the cooking pots crushed. So Zhang Yu burnt down the ships of his own forces and destroyed all the cooking pots of his own soldiers. Why did he do that? Zhang Yu explained to his troops that without the pots and the ships, they had no other choice but to fight their way to victory or perish. That did not earn Zhang Yu a place on the Chinese army's list of favorite commanders, but it did have a tremendous focusing effect on his troops. Grabbing their lances and bows, they charged ferociously against the enemy and won consecutive battles, completely obliterating the main force units of the Qin dynasty. You see, what Zhang Yu understood was that if his soldiers don't have options and they don't have doors open and they don't have an escape route, they have no choice but to desperately fight for their lives. And that's something which Dan Ariely then takes on to other areas of our lives. He discusses it in the world of relationships, about the ability to succeed more in committing to one relationship if you close other doors at the same time. Or he talks about the options we give our children, that sometimes we give our children too many options and you want them to have sport and chess and, I don't know, programming and ballet and musical instruments and every musical instrument and offer them everything. And if we give our children too many options, we're preventing them the opportunity to really focus and work hard and develop an expertise in one particular area. And he talks about it in the field of economics and in other fields of decision making as well. It's counterintuitive, but what he's saying is if you close the doors and close up options, that can actually encourage innovation and encourage expertise and greater success. And I think this is an amazing concept for us to think about in general, and particularly now. In general, what it means is that when doors are closed to us, whilst it may be sad or depressing or difficult, we have to use those closed doors as opportunities to respond and for it to encourage us to do our very, very best and to succeed. And there's no better example than the modern state of Israel. How has Israel been so successful, other than with the help of Hashem, of course? Israel is a country which doesn't have natural trade partners. We don't get on very nicely with our neighbors. Israel is a country which is not blessed with incredible natural resources. Israel is a country that always lives under the threat of war and terror. It's a country with a small population. There are so many doors which are shut to Israel. But perhaps it's because there are so many trade and economic and other doors which have been shut to Israel, that Israel has been forced to become so innovative and such an innovative global power, because we've had to invest in our greatest resource, which is just ourselves, the Israeli people. And so the closing of doors, whilst disappointing, can actually lead to far greater results. And the other reason why I think this is a great concept at the moment is because nearly all of us at the moment are living behind closed doors. We're living in a lockdown. We're living in an experience where the doors are being shut, and our opportunities to go out and expand our horizons and travel and visit and socialize and interact have been completely removed from us. And what we have to do, like Zhang Yu's army, is to use these opportunities where the doors have been shut before us to do our very, very best with whatever we have to reach great results. This should encourage us and drive us and inspire us to achieve things that we would have been unable to achieve had those normal doors been left open as well. Because when you leave doors open, it can prevent you from moving forwards in the right direction. And I'll give one example of this before moving on to the modern day ethical IDF question of, do we need to follow the laws of the war with Midian when the state of Israel goes to war today? But one example from this week's second Parsha of Parshat Masei. It's a little bit wordy, but it's a great concept from the Kli Yakar. In source number 6 from the beginning of Parshat Masei, prior to the description of the journeys of the Israelites in the Midbar, we're told as follows. Vayichtov Moshe et motza'ehem lemas'ehem. Moshe wrote down their goings out according to their journeys. Al pi Hashem, and that was by the mouth of Hashem. Ve'ele mas'ehem lemotza'ehem. These are their journeys according to their goings out. Now note how the yellow and green in these phrases has been reversed. Moshe wrote down our goings out according to our journeys, meaning our points of departure according to our destinations, and that was by the mouth of Hashem. Ve'ele, and these are maseihem lemotzeihem. These are our journeys according to our goings out. These are our destinations according to our points of departure. So the phrase has been reversed in the pasuk, and the first phrase is al pi Hashem, when the goings out are according to the journeys. That's what Hashem wants. But what really happened was that the journeys were according to the goings out. Now this all sounds very wordy. What's going on? On Monday morning with the ladies, we saw 3 different explanations. I'm going to focus just on one of them. And the Kli Yakar explains that what we had in the Midbar were 2 different groups of individuals with 2 very different mindsets. And he explains as follows in source number 7. When the Torah says that Moshe wrote down our goings out according to our journeys by the mouth of Hashem, Zonesiat B'nai Yisrael. That's the way the mainstream, the Israelite camp traveled. Asher Yesodam Me'eretz HaKadoshah, because our source comes from the Holy Land. Al Kein Hafchu Tamid Pneihem Min Motzeihem Hamakom Asher Yatzu Misham Mimitzrayim. For the Bnei Yisrael in the wilderness, we turned our back on Egypt, and we turned away from where we came from. Umegamat Pneihem Lemaseihem. We were entirely focused on our journey. Lavo el haaretz asher nishba Hashem la'avotam, that Hashem had promised to our forefathers. That was the Bnei Yisrael. But amongst us, there was another group as well, and that group was called the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were the mixed multitude who tagged along. They escaped in the night. Moshe agreed to allow them to come along, and they caused us a lot of trouble along the way. But if we look at the psychology of the Erev Rav, we see at the bottom of page 2 that the Kli Yakar explains, Aval ha'erev Rav, that mixed multitude, shehayu mekoram mitzrayim, they came from Egypt, and that's where they drew their source from. V'lo yatzu al pi Hashem, they didn't leave Egypt by Hashem's mouth. No, ki Moshe midato hotziam, Moshe by himself decided to bring them out. Nemar bahem, about them it says, ve'ele maseihem lemotza'ehem, their journeys were according to their points of departure. which means Ki tamid haya lehem chefetz v'ratzon lashuv leMitzrayim limkoram. They always wanted to go back to Egypt. Every time in the Torah where it says, why couldn't we have gone back to Egypt? We missed the way things were in Egypt. That's it, we're giving up. We're going back to Egypt. There was a voice within our camp which was constantly trying to pull us and take us back to Egypt. They were always focused on that way backwards. So within Bnei Israel, and this is differently from how I explained it on Monday morning, within Bnei Israel we have two groups. We have one group which only has one open door. That open door is the land of Canaan, Eretz Yisrael. We're on this journey, we're going to Israel. That's it, where else are we going to go? But within us there was a voice, and within us there was a group which didn't yet have closure from Mitzrayim. And there was this niggling voice which always said, you know, maybe we can go back to Mitzrayim. Maybe it wasn't so terrible in Mitzrayim. The fish in Mitzrayim wasn't bad, and we didn't even have to pay for it. Mitzrayim was a tax haven. When we go to Israel, we're going to have to give Meiser and Truma and all these different things. In Mitzrayim, we didn't pay any taxes. There was this niggling voice because we left the Mitzrayim door open in our minds. For some of us, it held us back as a nation. And the Mitzrayim option prevented us from moving forwards. Sometimes making up your mind, having a strong decision, moving forwards in only one direction will make you much more powerful and much more successful than leaving too many options open. In the final section of tonight's shiur, I would like to share with you a halachic debate between two great modern Israeli voices about whether or not what we've learned about this week's Parsha applies to the modern day IDF. And it's a debate between Rav Shlomo Goren and Rav Shaul Yisraeli. This has been debated at different times in Israel's history, but the context of this debate is Milchemet Shlom HaGalil. It's 1982, we're at war against Lebanon, and we have the siege of Beirut. And the question is, from a halachic point of view, if the Israeli Defense Forces are waging war and they come to Beirut, do they have to leave an escape route in Beirut based on what Ramban Nachmanides learned is one of the 613 mitzvot from this week's Parsha? And it doesn't only apply to cities. I mean, this is a very complex halachic area. There are 6 or 7 different considerations which clash in the one halachic decision. But on any Israeli army operation, are you allowed to surround your enemy from all sides? Or do we have a biblical halachic obligation to leave a side open for our enemies to escape? Rav Shlomo Goren, at the time in 1982, was no longer the chief rabbi of the IDF. He was now the chief rabbi of Israel. And he had a very clear view on the matter. So source number 8 is what Rav Goren wrote in the context of Mivtza Shlom HaGalil in 1982. And he writes with great confidence. The person who argues with him is going to write with equal confidence. But Rav Goren writes with great confidence. And he says, Ein kol tzel shel safek. There is not the slightest shadow of doubt shehalacha, that the Jewish law is bidvar hachova b'matzor, when it comes to the obligation, when it comes to a siege, lehashir ruach revi'it patuach, you must leave a fourth direction open, kedei latet la'oyev efsharut lamalet nafsho, to provide the enemy an opportunity to flee for their lives. And Rav Goren says explicitly, Hi batokef gam b'milchemet Shlom HaGalil b'Lebanon, in Milchemet Shlom HaGalil in Lebanon. That is the halacha. You are not allowed to surround your enemy from all sides. And he says, Sheladat kulei alma. This is the unanimous halachic view. Anu mitzavim liftach la'oivim ruach achat. Everybody agrees that we have to leave open one direction for our enemies. Shetieh chad sitrit, it should be a one-way open direction. Kedei la'afsher livroach min ha'ir v'lemalet al nafsham, so that those inside the siege can escape outwards. He says there's no halachic obligation to allow anybody who wants into the city for them to get extra soldiers and extra reinforcements, but he says you have to halachically leave a one-way escape route. And he says, "V'harei zohi mataratenu," this is our aim. "Umatarata harishmit hamutzeret shel memshelet Yisrael v'shel Tzahal." This is the aim and the official declared aim of the government of Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces. This is the official Israeli policy. The policy of Ramban, based on Rabbi Natan in the Midrash, the policy of Torah to leave an escape route for your enemies. And he says, "V'asur lizgor et Beirut haramatit ma'ar baruchoteh." You're just not allowed to surround Beirut from all sides. "Avar rishaim anu limnoa mehem hava'at tigboret." We're allowed to stop them from getting, like I said before, reinforcements. Ba'anashim, whether it's human reinforcements, b'mazon, or extra food or water, kedei lavi otam l'dei chni'ah, in order to suppress them and to bring them to what's that nice word for giving up? You know, the one to wave the white flag. It's escaped my head. Mehira, quickly. Thank you, Rafi. Surrender. Lelo shvichut damim, without murder. Shel chafim mipesha, of innocent people. This is what Rav Goren says. He says it's a halachically unanimous thing. And now, what's interesting is, you might recall that Ramban, Nachmanides, when he said this, said that this applies to a milchemet reshut, a permissive war, which means, according to Nachmanides, it doesn't apply to a milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war. Now, Rav Goren himself wrote on many occasions that he views the modern day wars of Tzahal to be in the category of milchemet mitzvah, life-saving wars which are to prevent existential threats against Jewish life and the Jewish land, and therefore he views this as being a milchemet mitzvah. He doesn't argue that point, but Rav Goren is of the view that while Ramban Nachmanides said that this only applies to a milchemet reshut, Rambam Maimonides applies it even to a milchemet mitzvah. Now, how can Rambam Maimonides say that it applies to a milchemet mitzvah and not include it in the 613 mitzvot? If this was a Tuesday halacha shiur, we may continue with that question, but it's a Thursday night Parsha shiur, so we will focus on the themes as opposed to the halachic intricacies. And then Rav Goren goes on to say, not only is this a military responsibility, it is a religious and rabbinic responsibility. B'midah mesuyemet, to a certain extent. Chova zo motelet gam al rabbanei Yisrael. It's up to the rabbis of Israel to ensure that this is the way Israel behaves. La'afil et midat harachmanut shebetorah v'shalacha, to ensure that the characteristic of mercy which appears in Torah and halacha is brought to fruition. B'yichud ka'asher halacha hi brura b'nidon zeh u'mechayevet, especially since in this case the halacha is so clear and straightforward and it's obligatory. Pen yitzeh chilul Hashem chas v'chalila sheyomru shetorah Yisrael me'afsheret harigat chavim mipesha. He says chas v'shalom. We don't want to chilul Hashem, that anyone will suggest that the Torah and Jewish law itself supports and endorses the killing of innocent individuals, imaratzchim, together with murderers, lelo havchana, without any differentiation. And he goes on to say with great pride about the historic achievement of the IDF, v'yesh litzayen b'sipuk. I want to say with a level of satisfaction and pride, shetzahal nahag ken kol yemei hamatzor ha-Beirut. This is actually what the IDF did throughout the siege on Beirut. Whoever wanted to escape from Beirut was given the opportunity to do so. He was able to escape, save his life, and his wife and his kids. He says again, because that is what the halacha suggests, not suggests, mandates that you have to do. Rav Goren time and time again says it's unanimous, it's clear, it's black and white. This is the halacha. It's what the state of Israel should do and what the Israeli army should do. Now, some of you who are listening this evening may think, isn't this wonderful? Our Torah is humanitarian, and our army is humanitarian, and our Medina is humanitarian. And some of you might be thinking, I wonder if that's really a clever thing to do. Should the state of Israel and the IDF as an official policy never close off an enemy? from all four sides. And if you are not so comfortable with this humanitarian interpretation of halacha, then you will be more comfortable with Rav Shaul Yisraeli, who argued strongly against Rav Goren in source number 9. Who was Rav Shaul Yisraeli? For a while, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz Arav. He founded the Eretz Chemda Institute, which some of you may know from Yerushalayim today. Our Rosh Kollel, Rabbi Yehoshua Asolin, studied in the Eretz Chemda Institute. After my shiur tonight, you can log into Rabbi Yehoshua Asolin's shiur in Ivrit Kala, simple Hebrew. It's a great opportunity to continue your learning into the night. Rav Shaul Yisraeli was one of the major religious Zionist voices and poskim. And in this occasion, he was not afraid to take it to Rav Shlomo Goren and to completely disagree with him about the way the IDF needs to behave. So this is his response. It wasn't his initial response. It's a more organized response, which he puts together in the Tchumen Journal, Volume 4. The Tchumen Journal is a journal of the Tzomet Institute, which they're still producing until this day. And there he lays out his halachic conclusion and the basic points of halacha. Aleph, he says, number 1, Hamachablim, we're talking about terrorists, Shemataratam hamutzeret, whose declared goal is Lifgoa biyudim yoshvei Eretz Yisrael, to attack the Jews who live in Israel. V'yadam shlucha gam biyudim b'chol makom, and their arm is outstretched against Jews wherever they are. I think Moshe made this comment in the chat. You know, that we're not necessarily talking about an organized army. These are terrorists, but he says, these are terrorists who want to kill Jews in Israel and across the world. Umibli havchana, and they don't differentiate. Ben tza'ir lezaken, ben nashim v'taf, between young and old, women and children. He says, from a halachic point of view, when we're dealing with such terrorists, dinam pasuk lemita, the halacha is that they must be put to death. Kedin rodef achar, I missed out a word there. Is rodef achar acher lehorgo? I could be a Rav Rimon and change the source sheet as you go along. Like someone who's running after someone else in order to kill them. He says, when you're dealing with terrorists, the halacha is you must kill them. That's assumption number 1. Assumption number 2, hamilchama b'machablim eila hi milchemet mitzvah. The type of war that we're talking about here is a milchemet mitzvah. It's an obligatory war. We're not in the field of a milchemet reshut. This is a milchemet mitzvah. Point Gimel. Din zehu muskam umukubal al kol harishonim be'ein cholek. This is the unanimous view amongst all the Rishonim, and nobody argues. So what's great is that when Rav Goren is arguing with Rav Yisraeli, there's one thing they agree on, which is that they both have the unanimous view. Point Daled. B'milchemet mitzvah, when it comes to a milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war, hashikul lahaniach derech brecha lantzurim, olo, the decision as to whether you should leave an escape route to those who are besieged or not, Netunah l'shikul biladi, is the exclusive decision shel mefakdei hatzava v'hamemshala ha'achrayit lena'asehem, of the army officers and the government which is responsible for what they do. According to Rav Shaul Yisraeli, this isn't time for religious campaigns. This isn't a religious responsibility. It's not time for the rabbis to get involved. The only people who need to decide as to whether you leave a space open or not are the Israeli army generals and the Israeli government. In that, this is a 100% strategic decision from a halachic point of view. The halacha is leave it to the experts. And he finishes off by saying in point Hey, Ein hadvarim ha'amurim mityachasim ela ba'asher lemechablim. I'm only talking about terrorists. Olam ha'ochlosiyah izrachit, where there is a civilian population involved. Einam bichlal zeh, they're not included in this. V'yesh la'afsher lahem latzet ma'matzor ba'ein mafriya. you should allow innocent civilians to get out of the way without troubling them. However, when it comes to those who you are declaring war against, those who want to kill you and Jews all across the world, he says, you don't have to leave an open space according to halakha. The only people who can make that decision are the army generals. Now, where does this whole debate between Rav Goren and Rav Yisraeli come from? It comes from many points of discussion. But one of them, on the most simple level, is the point of discussion which we've been discussing in our shiur this evening, which is when the Torah tells us, based on the Midrash, that you have to leave a side open. Why is that the case? Is it in order to be humanitarian, or is it for the strategic value? If the Torah is telling us on a humanitarian level that you have to leave an escape route, then on a humanitarian level, you have to leave an escape route. And the rabbis need to be involved. And that's the route that Rav Goren took. According to Rav Yisraeli, the reason why the Torah tells us to leave an escape route isn't humanitarian, it's strategic. Like the Meshech Chochmah explained the Rambam. The Meshech Chochmah was an expert in the Rambam. He also wrote a book called the Or Sameach, which was just a commentary on the Rambam. He knew Rambam. So he says, if it's purely strategic, then you do that which is strategically best. Sometimes it is strategically best to leave a door open. Sometimes it's strategically best to close all the doors. So we have in the modern day state of Israel, based on that little midrash in the Sifrei with the first opinion of Rabbi Natan, a raging halachic debate as to whether the modern army of the state of Israel needs to leave an escape route open or not. And Rabbi Yisraeli concluded with a postscript, which he wrote 1 year later. It's included in the same article, where he believes that what took place in Beirut after these events proved him, unfortunately, right. What did Rav Yisraeli write at the end of page 3? Me'az nichtavu hadvarim. Once, or after this article was written, Avra Shana, now a whole year has passed. We're now in 1983. And Rav Yisraeli writes, at the time we had an argument as to what the best thing to do was. He says, let's see what's happened as a result of the decisions and the policies which were taken then. He says, what's happened over this last year? We've had a year which is Rabat Gilgulim v'Tafuchot, a year filled with revolutions and upheavals. It's been a right mess. Ka'et, he says, right at the moment. Im hafa'at hadvarim bitfus, as this article goes to print, mitcholalim kravot akuvim midam. There are battles steeped in blood taking place bein edot shonot b'Levanon, between the different gangs, groups, assemblies in Lebanon. So there's a lot of civil turmoil in Lebanon. And he says, once the IDF has retreated from certain places, what do we hear? Now the terrorists are going back. And now they're actively involved in these battles. And therefore, he says, the very same soldiers, the very same terrorists who the IDF allowed to escape are now returning to posts previously manned by the Israeli army, and they now have an advantage over us by the border. And he says, B'himirut mesachreret, with dizzying speed, מתנקמת בנו הססנות של הממשלה שנכנעה ללחץ. The hesitation of the Israeli government, which gave in to pressure to allow the terrorists to escape, is now biting us back. Our army left an escape route. We let them escape. בניגוד להדרכת התורה, against the Torah. Because the Torah says, don't let them escape. And our Israeli government gave in to pressure, and it allowed those terrorists to escape. And now those terrorists are back in place. He finishes off and says, what we can do now, all we can do is daven. So tonight we've looked at a battle which appears in Parshat Matot, and I think this battle is hugely relevant to us today. We've seen on the halachic practical level, when it comes to the ethical decisions and the halachic decisions of the Israeli army today, the way we understand the midrash about the battle with Midian in this week's Parsha will impact the way we decide that the IDF needs to act according to halacha today. There are very different views in the midrash and very different views in the Rishonim and very different views today as to what is the correct halachic approach. But as is Baruch Hashem the place, everybody agrees that they're right and everybody agrees that everyone else amongst the Rishonim agrees with them. And in terms of the themes of the war with Amalek, what the war in Amalek teaches us is that going into lockdown doesn't mean it's the end of the story. Sometimes going into lockdown can encourage us, it can motivate us, and it can drive us to become the very best versions of who we can be. And Be'ezrat Hashem, the doors which are locked to us at the moment should have that impact on us and help us achieve really great things. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbos.
Is Rabbi Sulan on the same Zoom as this?
No, it's a different link. So you can get in through Mizrahi Matters or in the cover letter of this week's Mizrahi.
Oh, okay, thank you. Shkoyach. Thank you.
Okay, how about what?
It wasn't a great show.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah?
Yeah.